It was a surprisingly sunny spring day. Sarah was arranging fresh bouquets in the window of her small flower shop, trying to catch the morning sun so that it would beautifully illuminate the delicate petals of the pink peonies. Last fall, she had finally decided to start her own business, and now Sarah's flower house occupied a cozy space on the corner of Maple Street, not far from the city center. The bell above the door jingled melodiously, and Mrs. Parker, a regular customer who bought fresh flowers every week for her beauty salon across the street, entered the shop. "Good morning, dear. Your arrangements are delightful as always." The woman stopped at the counter, looking at the new bouquets. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker. The usual white lilies?" "Yes, and maybe add some freesias. They smelled so wonderful last week." While Sarah was putting together the bouquet, two more women entered the shop, customers of Mrs. Parker's salon. They were talking quietly, standing by the wall with the potted plants. "And can you believe that Rachel is now handling all the big deals at the agency? They say she has some connections at the Reed supermarket chain." Sarah froze for a moment but continued working on the bouquet, trying not to show that she was listening to the conversation. "No wonder. Have you seen how she dresses? Everything is from famous designers. You can't dress like that on a real estate agent's salary." "Quiet. It's his wife's shop," one of the women nodded toward Sarah. The conversation immediately turned to the new collection at the local boutique. Sarah finished the bouquet, wrapped it neatly in the shop's branded craft paper, and handed it to Mrs. Parker. Left alone, she sat down at the counter and opened her diary. Over the past few weeks, Howard had indeed mentioned a Rachel quite often in conversations about work. Rachel found a great place. Rachel negotiated favorable terms. Sarah never thought much of it. After all, her husband was always working with different people, expanding his chain of stores. Her memory helpfully jogged her recollection of how they had met. 5 years ago, Sarah had been working as a florist in a large shopping mall, and Howard often stopped by to pick up fresh flowers for his first store. She remembered his confident gait, his attentive gaze, and how he always found a couple of minutes to chat with her, even when he was in a hurry. She remembered their first date at a small Italian restaurant, where Howard talked about his plans for growing his business with such enthusiasm that it was impossible not to be infected by his dream. The ring of the phone snapped her out of her memories. "Howard." "Hi, honey. Sorry, I'll be late today. Important meeting with potential partners. Don't wait up for dinner." "Sure, no problem," Sarah replied, noting that this was the third time that week. After the call, she opened her social media and typed "Rachel Realtor" into the search bar. Several profiles, but only one local. A young, striking brunette with a professional photo shoot in an expensive office. And indeed, her style was impeccable. Every photo looked like it was from the cover of a magazine. Sarah closed her browser and went back to work. After all, she had plenty of wedding decoration orders. She needed to draw up a quote for a new cafe. And anyway, it was silly to attach any importance to a conversation she had overheard by chance. But somewhere in the back of her mind, the mention of connections in the Reed supermarket chain kept nagging at her. The day went on as usual. Customers came in. Sarah arranged bouquets, discussed orders, and watered the plants. But her thoughts kept returning to the morning conversation. In the evening, as she was closing the shop, she caught herself trying to remember the last time Howard had given her flowers. It used to happen often, for no particular reason, simply because she loved flowers. But now, Sarah shook her head, chasing away the unwelcome thoughts. She was probably just tired. Spring was a busy season for florists, with lots of work to do, so all sorts of nonsense popped into her head. She locked the shop door and headed for her car. An empty house and a lonely dinner awaited her at home, but it wouldn't be for long. Howard was just going through an important period in the development of his business. Everything was as usual. But then why did she feel so uneasy? The sun was setting as Sarah climbed the stairs to the attic of her house. After a hectic day at the shop, she suddenly felt like looking through some old photos. The attic smelled of wood and a little dust. Sarah turned on the light and went over to the old chest of drawers where the family albums were kept. The first thing that caught her eye was a photograph of her grandmother, Martha. The picture was taken on the day Howard opened his first store. Martha was standing next to her grandson with her hand on his shoulder. Her eyes shone with pride, and on her finger sparkled the very same sapphire ring, the only piece of jewelry she wore all the time. Sarah remembered the first time she met Martha. Howard had brought her to meet his grandmother in a small but very cozy house on the outskirts of town. Martha had set the table in the garden where her favorite roses were blooming. "You know," she said to Sarah as she poured the tea, "the most important thing in life is not money or success. The most important thing is to remain true to yourself and your principles." Sarah turned the page of the album. It was the day of their engagement. Howard had organized dinner at the same Italian restaurant where they had their first date. Afterwards, he took her to his grandmother's house. "I have something special for you," Martha said, taking out a small velvet box. Inside was an antique ring with a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "This ring has been in our family for 3 generations. My grandmother got it from her mother-in-law, then it came to me. Now I want it to be yours." Howard was just as surprised as Sarah. He had never seen his grandmother take off the ring. "But Grandma," he began. But Martha shook her head. "I decided long ago that it should go to the woman who would become your wife, and I'm glad that it's Sarah." That evening they sat in Grandma's garden for a long time, and Martha told the story of her family, how her husband started out with a small grocery store, how the business gradually grew, how she supported him in everything, even when everyone around them said the venture was doomed to failure. "Howard is very much like his grandfather," Martha said, "just as determined, just as passionate. Only sometimes he's too hasty. He wants everything right away." Sarah turned a few more pages. There were photos from the opening of Howard's second store. Martha was already ill at the time, but she came anyway. She always supported her grandson in all his endeavors, helping him with advice and sometimes with money, especially in the early days. Their relationship was special. Howard grew up without parents. They died in a car accident when he was 12. Martha replaced both his mother and father. Perhaps that was why he was so eager to prove himself. He built his business with such obsession, as if trying to live up to someone's expectations. The last photo was taken a month before Martha's death. She was sitting in her favorite chair in the garden, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm day. The ring was already with Sarah. Martha had insisted on giving it to her right after they got engaged, without waiting for the wedding. "Take care of it," she had said to Sarah. "It's not just a piece of jewelry. It's a reminder of those who believed in love more than money and success." Sarah closed the album and pressed it to her chest. After Martha's death, Howard changed a lot. He became even more obsessed with work, as if trying to fill the void left by her loss. Maybe that's why Sarah decided to keep the ring in a bank-safe deposit box. It seemed too precious to wear every day. Sarah went down from the attic to the bedroom. Their wedding photo stood on the bedside table. Howard smiled so sincerely, so happily. Where had that smile gone? When had work become more important than everything else? The front door slammed. Howard was back. Sarah quickly wiped away an unwelcome tear. She needed to heat up dinner and not think about the strange conversation at the store. Not think about the young, striking brunette with impeccable style. Not think about how long it had been since her husband had talked to her about anything other than work. But Martha's voice still seemed to echo in her ears. "The main thing is to stay true to yourself and your principles." Sarah first met Rachel at a city cafe where she stopped during her lunch break. Howard was sitting at a table by the window with a stunning brunette, and they were so engrossed in conversation that they didn't notice her arrival. Sarah froze at the entrance, watching her husband gesticulate animatedly as he explained something to his companion, who listened attentively, leaning forward slightly. "Sarah, darling, what a surprise!" Howard finally noticed his wife and immediately got up from the table. "Meet Rachel Donovan, the real estate agent who is helping us expand our network. Rachel, this is my wife." Rachel smiled and held out her hand. "At last, Howard has told me so much about you. You have a beautiful shop, by the way. I often walk by. The window displays are stunning." Her voice sounded sincere and friendly, but something about her smile made Sarah wary. Perhaps it was too professional, too polished, like an experienced real estate agent. After that meeting, Rachel's name began to appear more and more often in their lives. Howard constantly mentioned her in conversation. Rachel had found a great place. Rachel had negotiated favorable lease terms. Rachel had recommended a new supplier. She seemed to become an invisible participant in their family life. Business meetings became more frequent. Howard stayed late at work more often, came home late in the evening, and missed family dinners. "Sorry, honey, important negotiations. We were looking at new premises. We were discussing the terms of the contract." The excuses sounded convincing. After all, the business was really expanding. One morning, while gathering her husband's things for the dry cleaners, Sarah found a receipt from a jewelry store in his jacket pocket. It was an expensive store in the city center, and the amount was impressive. The date on the receipt was 3 days ago. Sarah froze, staring at the thin strip of paper. Her birthday was in 2 months, and their wedding anniversary had just passed. Howard hadn't mentioned buying jewelry. That evening, she casually asked about his plans for growing the business. Howard perked up and started talking about new locations and promising areas. "You know, Rachel is just invaluable in these matters. She has an amazing knack for finding good locations. She and I are going to check out a new shopping center tomorrow." Sarah listened half-heartedly, noting how her husband's tone changed when he mentioned Rachel's name. He used to talk about his stores like that, with enthusiasm, with a sparkle in his eyes. Now that sparkle appeared when he talked about promising projects and important meetings. The next day, Sarah went to that same jewelry store, just to look at the windows, to convince herself that everything was fine. The young salesman smiled warmly. "How can I help you? We just got a new collection in." "Thank you, I'm just looking," Sarah said, slowly walking along the display cases, examining the jewelry. Something in one of them caught her eye. A ring, remarkably similar to her grandmother's. The same design, the same sapphire framed by diamonds. "A wonderful choice," the salesman noticed her interest. "It's a replica of an antique piece, custom made. The man who ordered it was very attentive to detail." Sarah felt a lump rise in her throat. When was that? Last week. A very nice gentleman, clearly a businessman. His companion was delighted with the work. Sarah returned home in a daze. Fragments of phrases and random details that had previously seemed insignificant swirled around in her head. The late phone calls that Howard preferred to take in another room, the new perfume that had appeared a month ago, the business dinners to which he had stopped inviting her. That evening, Howard returned unusually excited. "Can you believe it? We found the perfect place. Rachel is amazing. She's already negotiated the preliminary terms. Tomorrow we have an important dinner with the building owner to discuss everything." Sarah looked at her husband and, for the first time in a long time, saw him as if from the outside. When had he become such a stranger? Or was she just unwilling to notice the changes? In the bedroom, she stared at her reflection in the mirror for a long time. "I wonder what it's like to be Rachel. Young, successful, with impeccable style and a professional smile. The kind of woman people order copies of family heirlooms for." Sarah couldn't sleep that night. Howard was breathing steadily beside her, and she thought about the key to the safe deposit box where the real ring was kept. She thought about her grandmother Martha and her words about staying true to your principles. She thought about what she would have to do tomorrow. Margaret Wilson had lived in the same house for 40 years. The small but well-kept mansion was surrounded by flowers. Grandma Martha and Margaret had always shared a passion for gardening. Sarah remembered how, as children, she and Howard often found the old ladies having tea in the ivy-covered gazebo. Ringing the doorbell, Sarah nervously adjusted her bag on her shoulder. The visit was spontaneous. She was just passing by and decided to drop in on a sudden impulse. The door opened and Margaret appeared on the threshold, as straight as ever despite her age, with her gray hair neatly combed. "Sarah, what a pleasant surprise. Come in. I was just about to have some tea." The living room was exactly as it had been many years ago. The same antique tea set, the same lace doilies, even the smell of homemade cookies. Margaret poured tea into the cups and looked intently at her guest. "Something happened, dear. You look just like Martha when she was worried." Sarah stirred her tea with a spoon, gathering her thoughts. "Mrs. Wilson, Margaret dear, how many times do I have to tell you? Margaret, you were Grandma Martha's best friend. Do you know if she ever mentioned any important documents? A will, perhaps?" Margaret set her cup down on the saucer. The room fell silent, broken only by the ticking of the old clock. "You know, Martha was very worried about Howard in her last months. She said he was too caught up in his pursuit of success and had forgotten what was important." Margaret stood up and walked over to the old secretary desk. "She left something with me. She said the time would come when it would be needed." A folder, yellowed with age, appeared from the drawer. "Here are copies of some documents." Martha was a wise woman. She foresaw that business could change Howard, so she took precautions. Sarah carefully took the folder. Inside were copies of some contracts, old photographs, and letters. But why didn't she give this to Howard? Because she knew he wasn't ready. Martha said that money and power can corrupt even the best of people. She hoped that you could balance his drive for success. Margaret poured more tea. "You know, when Martha gave you the ring, it wasn't just a gesture. She believed that you would preserve not only the jewelry, but also the values it symbolized." Sarah began to sort through the documents. Among them was an old newspaper clipping about the opening of Howard's first store. In the photo, he was standing next to his grandmother, very young and full of enthusiasm. After Howard's parents died, Martha devoted her life to her grandson. She invested all her savings in his first store, but she also understood that money can destroy a person. That's why she wrote her will very prudently. Sarah looked up from the documents. "What do you mean?" "Look in the bank, dear. In the same safe deposit box where the ring is kept, there should be an envelope. Martha put it there shortly before she died." When Sarah was about to leave, Margaret walked her to the door. "You know, your mother-in-law wasn't just my friend. We went through a lot together, both good times and bad. She would be very upset to know what's happening now." "What do you mean? About Howard? About his new priorities?" Margaret paused. "There's a lot of talk in town, and not all of it is pleasant." On the way home, Sarah thought about the old woman's words. What else did her grandmother know? What documents were waiting in the bank's safe deposit box? And most importantly, what should she do with what she already knew? That evening, when Howard was once again delayed at an important meeting, Sarah took out her grandmother Martha's old diary, which she had kept as a memento. Leafing through the pages, she noticed several names and phone numbers marked in red pen. Among them was the number of a law firm and the name James Porter, attorney. Sarah wrote down the number. Tomorrow morning she would call the bank and check the contents of the safe deposit box, and then, perhaps, she would visit Mr. Porter. After all, Grandma Martha hadn't left all those clues for nothing. As she fell asleep, Sarah thought about how tomorrow could change everything. But for some reason, The thought didn't scare her as much as it should have. Perhaps it was because deep down she already knew that sometimes you have to face the truth head on, no matter how bitter it may be. The bank was unusually quiet for a Tuesday morning. Sarah presented her documents and followed the employee into the vault. She hadn't looked in the safe deposit box for over a year. There was no need to. The ring was safely stored there, along with other important documents. The metal box looked exactly as Sarah remembered it. Inside, in a velvet case, lay her grandmother's ring, the sapphire glimmering softly in the lamplight. Next to it was a thick envelope she hadn't noticed before, or didn't want to notice. The envelope was sealed and inscribed in her grandmother's handwriting. For Sarah, open when the time comes. Sarah ran her fingers over the faded ink. The time had definitely come. In a small cafe across the street from the bank, she finally opened the envelope. Inside were several documents and a letter. Sarah unfolded it, recognizing the familiar handwriting. Dear Sarah, if you are reading this letter, it means that something has caused you to doubt what is happening. I have known Howard all his life and love him like my own son, but I also know his weaknesses. Ambition and the desire for success can blind him to everything else, even love. In this envelope, you will find documents about the real state of our family business. The first store was opened with my money, and according to the documents, 51% of the company belongs to me. This will transfer my share to you, not Howard. I believe in you, Sarah. You can preserve what is truly important. The next item on the to-do list was a visit to a lawyer. James Porter turned out to be a gaunt man in his 60s with a penetrating gaze. His office was located in an old building in the city's business district. Martha foresaw this turn of events, he said after studying the documents. The will is flawlessly drafted. 51% of the company does indeed go to you, Mrs. Reed. That gives you control over all decisions. But why didn't Grandma say anything about this before? She hoped she wouldn't have to, that Howard would remain true to family values. Porter paused. But his recent decisions, expanding the network at any cost, questionable deals, Martha wouldn't have approved. After leaving the lawyer's office, Sarah drove to her shop. She had to get everything ready for tomorrow. Howard had planned a family dinner and wanted to introduce an important business partner. Sarah already knew who it would be. She spent the whole day arranging bouquets, talking to customers, doing everything as usual. But something had changed inside her. Now she had a plan. That evening, Sarah carefully chose an outfit for tomorrow's dinner, a simple black dress with minimal jewelry. Howard liked her to look elegant but understated. A businessman's wife should match his status, he often repeated. I wonder what he'll say tomorrow when he finds out about the will. When he realizes that all his plans for expanding the business now depend on her decision. In the bedroom, Sarah took her favorite box out of the closet. Inside was a photograph from their wedding. They were both so happy, so in love. Who would have thought that 5 years later she would be preparing for a conversation that could destroy everything? Howard came home late, as usual. Is everything ready for tomorrow's dinner? He asked, loosening his tie. The man who holds the future of the company in his hands is coming. Yes, dear. Everything will be perfect, Sarah replied, looking at her reflection in the mirror. The words from her grandmother's letter echoed in her head. You can keep what is truly important. She already knew that she would bring not only a folder with documents to dinner, but also a ring. A real ring, which was supposed to symbolize fidelity and love, but had become a witness to betrayal. As she fell asleep, Sarah thought about how tomorrow evening would put everything in its place. She felt no anger or desire for revenge, only a calm determination to learn the truth. And let the truth be bitter, better bitter truth than sweet lies. In the end, Grandma Martha was right. The most important thing was not money or success, but loyalty to oneself and one's principles. The morning began unusually. Howard was having breakfast at home. He usually left before dawn, grabbing a quick cup of coffee, but today he was sitting at the table, studying something on his phone, occasionally taking a sip from his cup. "I ordered groceries to be delivered at 6, he said, without looking up from the screen. "Are you going to make something special? Tonight is an important evening." Sarah stirred her oatmeal, wondering how special this evening would be. "Of course. I remember you like my duck with oranges." "Great. And also," Howard finally looked up, "I invited Rachel. She's done a lot for the company, and it's time to introduce her to the family." Sarah almost dropped her spoon, officially, as if all their previous meetings had been informal, as if she hadn't seen them together in the cafe, hadn't overheard their conversations, hadn't found the receipts from the jewelry store. The day at the flower shop dragged on endlessly. Sarah mechanically arranged bouquets, answered phone calls, and talked to customers. During a break between orders, she took out her phone and dialed the bank's number. She needed to make sure the safe deposit box would be available after lunch. At 3 o'clock, she closed the shop and drove to the bank. The procedure for accessing the safe deposit box was familiar: documents, signature, following the employee to the vault. The ring lay in a velvet box just as she had left it. Sarah carefully took out the jewelry and held it up to the light. The sapphire sparkled softly, the diamonds around it shimmering, creating a unique play of light. No copy could convey the special, living beauty of this antique jewelry. Back home, Sarah began to prepare dinner. The delivery arrived at 6 o'clock sharp. Fresh groceries, a bottle of expensive wine, and Howard's favorite dessert. She methodically unpacked the bags, putting everything in its place. The duck was already marinating, the oven was preheating, and the table was set with the best china. The phone rang as she was slicing oranges. "Howard." "Honey, would you mind if we moved dinner back half an hour? Rachel's important meeting with a client is running late." "Of course, no problem," Sarah replied, looking at her reflection in the window. "I wonder if this client really exists." At 7 o'clock, everything was ready. The duck was roasting in the oven, filling the house with delicious aromas. Candles flickered on the table, and soft wine sparkled in glasses. Sarah went up to her bedroom to change. The black dress fit her perfectly, no jewelry except her wedding ring and a small velvet box in her purse. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror. A calm face, straight back, light makeup. Nothing betrayed the storm raging inside her. Downstairs, the front door slammed. Howard was back. Rachel should be arriving in a few minutes. Sarah checked the contents of her purse one last time. The ring and the folder with the documents were in their places. "You look gorgeous," said Howard, putting his arm around her waist. He smelled of unfamiliar perfume. He must have been getting ready for the meeting, too. "I'm sure you and Rachel will get along. She's an amazing woman." Sarah smiled, pulling away on the pretext of checking her phone. Amazing, perhaps, especially considering how surprised she would be when she saw the real ring. The doorbell rang at exactly 7:30. Sarah took a deep breath and went to answer it. It was time for the show to begin, where everyone played their part. Only the ending would not be what some of the participants expected. Rachel stood in the doorway, flawless as always. An expensive dress, perfect hair, a professional smile, and a ring on her finger, an exact replica of the one in Sarah's purse. "Good evening," Sarah said, stepping aside. "Come in. Dinner is almost ready." The evening promised to be interesting. Dinner began like any other social evening. Howard poured wine. Rachel talked about the latest trends in the real estate market, and Sarah served the dishes and kept the conversation light. To an outsider, it might have seemed like a gathering of old friends. "Sarah, this duck is simply delicious," Rachel said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "Now I understand why Howard has been raving about your cooking." Howard was clearly nervous, though he tried to hide it. He poured himself wine too often and constantly adjusted his tie, a sure sign of anxiety that Sarah had learned over the years of marriage. "You know, I'm so glad we finally got together," Rachel continued. "Howard and I have so many plans for growing our business. We've just found a few promising locations." Sarah noticed the ring on Rachel's finger flash as she reached for her glass. It was an exact replica, almost indistinguishable from the original. Almost. "What an unusual ring," Sarah said, deliberately drawing attention to the jewelry. "May I take a closer look?" Rachel readily held out her hand. "Oh, it's an amazing piece, an antique, passed down in the family." Howard choked on his wine. Sarah pretended to examine the ring closely. "It's very beautiful, indeed. The sapphire is so unusual and the diamonds are perfectly matched. You know, my mother-in-law had one just like it." "Really?" Rachel looked genuinely interested. "What an amazing coincidence." Sarah got up from the table and went over to her handbag. "What's more, it was so similar to yours that you'd think it was the same ring." She took out a velvet box and opened it. In the light of the chandelier, a sapphire sparkled, the original, which even the most skillful copy could not compare to. A dead silence hung in the dining room. Rachel froze with a glass in her hand, her professional smile turning into a mask. Howard turned pale and pushed his plate away. "Funny, isn't it?" Sarah spoke calmly, almost kindly. "Especially considering that this ring has been passed down through the Reed family on the female side for 3 generations, and Grandma Martha gave it to me along with some documents." She took a folder out of her purse and placed it on the table. "Howard, have you ever wondered why Grandma insisted on giving the ring to me? Not to you, her only grandson, but to your fiancé?" "Sarah, I can explain," Howard began, but she interrupted him. "Of course you can. For example, you can explain why you ordered a replica of the family heirloom, or why you hid from me that you don't own 51% of the company." Rachel slowly took off the ring and placed it on the table. "Howard said it was a gift from his grandmother. Technically, he didn't lie. It is a gift from his grandmother, just not to you, but to me, just like the controlling stake in the company." Howard stood up abruptly from the table. "That's impossible. I'm the only heir." "No, dear. Grandma Martha planned everything. She knew that money and power can change a person. That's why she wrote her will to preserve not only the business, but also our family values." Sarah opened the folder and laid the documents on the table. "Here's everything: the founding documents, the will, bank statements. The first store was opened with Grandma's money, and formally, 51% of the company always belonged to her. Now that share is mine." Rachel stood up, gathering her things. "I think I should go. This is clearly a family conversation." "Stay," Sarah smiled. "Since Howard wanted to introduce you to the family officially, let's be official about it. How would you feel about discussing a new management structure for the company?" The evening continued, but the atmosphere of a friendly dinner was gone forever. Ahead lay a long conversation about trust, betrayal, and consequences, and about how some things cannot be copied, whether it's an old ring or family values. The morning was cloudy. Sarah woke up in the guest bedroom where she had spent the night after Rachel finally left, and Howard locked himself in his study. The house seemed unusually quiet and empty. In the kitchen, she found traces of her husband's night vigil, a half-empty glass of whiskey and an ashtray with cigarette butts. Howard hadn't smoked for several years, keeping cigarettes only for guests. Apparently, it had been a rough night. Sarah was making coffee when he came downstairs. With his rumpled suit, red eyes, and the smell of tobacco, Howard clearly hadn't slept. "Can we talk?" He sat down at the table, mechanically adjusting yesterday's tie. Sarah silently placed a cup of coffee in front of him and sat down opposite him. The folder with the documents was still on the table. No one had cleared it away after dinner last night. "I didn't want it to turn out like this," Howard began, staring into his cup. At first, they were just business meetings. Rachel is a really good real estate agent. She found some great locations. Then, things just got out of hand. And the ring? Sarah tried to sound calm. She saw an old photo of you wearing it. She started asking questions. I told her about my grandmother, about the family history. Rachel was excited about getting one just like it. She said it would be a symbol of our future together. The doorbell rang. Rachel stood in the doorway without yesterday's glamour, but still striking even in simple jeans and a sweater. "We need to talk," she said, entering the house without waiting to be invited. "I've been thinking all night. It's not fair to just take and destroy all our plans like this." Sarah silently pointed to a chair. Rachel sat down and took some papers out of her bag. "Howard and I have a network development project. New locations, a modern store format, a different target audience. We could triple our profits in a year." "At what cost?" Sarah asked. "Closing old stores? Firing people who've worked there for years?" "It's business, honey." Rachel leaned back in her chair. "Nothing personal. Speaking of personal, you do realize that Howard is unhappy, don't you? That he needs a woman who shares his ambitions? That's enough." Howard slammed his palm on the table. "Rachel, stop it." "Why? Because your wife found some old papers? Big deal. We'll hire good lawyers. Contest the will." "It won't work." Sarah took out her phone. "I've already contacted my grandmother's lawyer. All the documents are in order. What's more, there are witnesses who saw her give me the ring and talk about the inheritance." Rachel jumped up, her eyes burning. "You can't do this. Howard and I love each other. We have plans, a future." "Sit down." Sarah's voice remained calm. "And let's talk about the future, about how you were going to run the company with no experience in retail, about what will happen to the chain's reputation when the story about the fake ring and the attempted hostile takeover comes out." Howard turned pale. "Hostile takeover? What else would you call your plan? Divorce the owner of the business from his wife, who owns the controlling stake, quickly arrange a new marriage and gain access to management. It's a classic scheme." Rachel opened her mouth but couldn't find anything to say. Sarah continued, "I met with my grandmother's lawyer. He told me about similar cases. Apparently, Martha had good reason to write her will that way." "What now?" Howard looked confused. "Now we have two options." Sarah laid the documents on the table. "The first is a long legal battle that will destroy both the business and our reputation. The second is that we sit down and calmly discuss a new management structure for the company. It's up to you." Rachel grabbed her bag and stood up. "I'm not going to listen to this. Howard, call me when you've sorted out your family problems." She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Howard and Sarah were left alone in the kitchen, with the documents and cold coffee between them. "You know," Howard finally said, "Grandma always said I was too hasty, that I was chasing success and forgetting what was important." "She was a wise woman," Sarah said, getting up to make fresh coffee. "And she loved you very much. So much that she took steps to protect not only the business but you as well." The day was just beginning. Ahead of her were meetings with lawyers, negotiations, decisions. But the most important thing had already happened. The cards were on the table, and there was no turning back. Bergman's jewelry workshop was located in the old part of town. Sarah had arrived early before opening time because she needed to talk to the master craftsman alone. But a surprise awaited her at the door. Rachel was pacing nervously in front of the entrance. When she saw Sarah, she turned away demonstratively. When the elderly jeweler opened the door, Rachel slipped inside first. "I want to know the truth about this ring," she said, placing the jewelry on the counter. "Did you make it?" Bergman squinted, examining the ring through a magnifying glass. At the sight of Sarah, he became visibly nervous but pulled himself together. "Yes, it's my work. Mr. Reed ordered an exact copy of an antique piece. He brought photos, measurements, and you just went ahead and made a fake?" Rachel's voice rang with anger. Not a fake, the craftsman corrected. A copy. I don't do fakes. Each of my pieces has a special mark, in this case, the letter B on the inside. Rachel grabbed the ring and held it up to her eyes. Sure enough, there was a tiny engraving inside. How much did he pay? That's confidential. How much? Rachel raised her voice. Bergman took a folder of documents out of the safe. 3 times the usual price for this kind of work. He insisted on the highest quality. Sarah watched the scene silently. She didn't need to ask about the price. The check from Howard's jacket pocket was still in her purse. Mr. Reed said it was a gift for someone special, the jeweler continued. I refused at first. I don't like copying antique pieces, but he was very insistent. A special person, Rachel smiled bitterly. Of course, so special that he didn't even want to part with the real ring. She threw the jewelry on the counter. You can keep this fake. At the door, Rachel turned to Sarah. You know, I really believed him. His words about love, about the future. But it turned out I was just part of his business plan. Just like this fake ring. When she left, Bergman sighed heavily. I'm sorry I got you involved in this, but when I found out that a copy had turned up at a family dinner, anyway, I decided I had to tell you everything. Sarah's phone rang. It was Howard. She dismissed the call. I need official confirmation that a copy was made, she told the jeweler. For the lawyers. Bergman nodded and took out a form. While he was writing, Sarah examined the copy of the ring on the counter. Outwardly, it was almost perfect, but inside, the treacherous letter V was a mark of deceit. The phone rang again. This time, Sarah answered. Please, let's talk. Howard's voice sounded tired. I'll explain everything. We can start over. No, she replied calmly. We can't. I'm filing for divorce. Sarah, please. I was an idiot. I got confused. But I love you. I always have. Goodbye, Howard. She hung up and turned to the jeweler. Is the document ready? Bergman handed her the paper. In his 40 years on the job, he had seen many different stories. But for the first time, one copy of a ring had destroyed 2 illusions of love at once. The law office smelled of coffee and fresh paper. Sarah sat in a comfortable leather chair, looking through a folder of divorce papers. Every line, every clause seemed so official, so final. We can file today, James Porter, the Reed's old lawyer, said, looking intently at Sarah. Given the circumstances and the evidence of infidelity, the process should be quick. Sarah nodded and picked up a pen. Yesterday, she had taken her things from the house and moved into a small apartment above a flower shop. Howard had called every hour. She hadn't answered once. What about the company? She asked as she signed the documents. According to Mrs. Martha Reed's will, you are the unconditional owner of the controlling interest. This is separate from the divorce proceedings. There was a knock at the door. The secretary peeked into the office. Mr. Reed is here. He insists on seeing you. Sarah sighed. Send him in. Howard looked rumpled, as if he hadn't slept for days. Perhaps that was the case. Sarah, please, let's talk, he said, stopping at the door. Alone. Whatever you want to say, you can say in front of Mr. Porter. He's handling our divorce. Howard paled. Divorce? But we can work things out. I broke up with Rachel. I realized my mistakes. After I found out about the ring, or after it turned out that I owned the controlling stake? Porter coughed delicately. I suggest we discuss the terms of the divorce and the future management of the company. I have a meeting with the board of directors at 2 o'clock. They spent the next hour discussing the details. Howard tried to argue, offered compromises, promised to change. Sarah silently signed the documents. After lunch, a meeting with the board of directors took place. Elderly men in expensive suits looked suspiciously at the young woman who had taken the place at the head of the table. Gentlemen, Sarah began, I understand your doubts, but let me present a plan for reorganizing the company. She took out the prepared documents. She had spent several weeks studying reports, consulting with experts, and developing a strategy. We will keep the traditional format of stores in residential areas where we have regular customers, but we will expand the range of products in shopping centers and add organic products and farm goods. The directors looked at each other. One of them, the oldest, smiled. You know, you just sounded like Martha when she was young. She also had a great sense of what people needed. By evening, all the necessary documents had been signed. Sarah left the office feeling strangely light. There was a lot of work ahead, many difficult decisions to make. But for the first time in a long time, she knew exactly what she was doing. Howard was waiting for her at the car. You know, he said, looking away, I really loved you. It's just, I lost myself in the pursuit of success. I know, Sarah replied, but some things can't be brought back, like trust or respect. She got into the car and started the engine. The rearview mirror reflected the silhouette of her husband, now her ex, the man she had loved for 5 years, the man who had betrayed not only her, but also his grandmother's memory. At home, Sarah took out her grandmother's ring. Now it symbolized not only her family history, but also her own strength, the ability to make decisions and take responsibility for them. A new path lay ahead, and she was ready to walk it. Her first day at the company's headquarters began early. Sarah arrived at 7 in the morning when only security guards and cleaners were in the building. She wanted to look around, get a feel for the place where Howard had worked for so many years. His office was exactly as she had imagined it, austere, functional, with a minimum of personal belongings. Their wedding photo was on the desk. Sarah put it in a drawer. It was time to start her own story. By 9 o'clock, the office was full of people. Sarah heard muffled conversations and felt curious glances. No wonder. Everyone already knew about the divorce and the change in management. Gossip spreads quickly in a small town. She scheduled her first meeting for 10 o'clock. She gathered all the department heads. She needed to make her position clear right away. Good morning. Sarah looked around at those present. Familiar faces. She had met many of them at corporate events. I understand that this is an unusual situation, but let's make one thing clear right away. The company is continuing to operate. What's more, changes are coming. She turned on the projector and began her presentation. A new store concept, an expanded product range, a program to support local producers. It was a plan she had been working on for several weeks, studying reports and consulting with experts. After the meeting, Anna Peterson, the head of the purchasing department, approached her. You know, these are really good ideas. We've been telling Howard for a long time that we need to work with local farmers, but he thought it wasn't profitable. The day flew by. Meetings, documents, phone calls. Sarah was surprised at how naturally she had slipped into this role. Perhaps her grandmother Martha's genes were showing. Towards evening, Howard appeared. He was still considered the executive director, although he no longer had any real power. I've looked over your proposals, he said, sitting down opposite her. Not bad ideas, but risky. Local suppliers are unreliable. Their products are more expensive. But they're better quality, Sarah interrupted. And that's important to people. Not everything can be measured in profit, Howard. He tried to argue, but was interrupted by a phone call. One of the major suppliers was demanding confirmation of the new management's authority. I'll deal with that myself, Howard said, reaching for the phone. No, Sarah shook her head. That's my job now. The conversation with the supplier took almost an hour, but the contract was saved. What's more, Sarah negotiated more favorable terms. By the end of the week, it was clear that the company was really changing. Employees who had been wary at first began to come forward with their own ideas and suggestions. It turned out that many had wanted change for a long time but were afraid of the conservatism of the previous management. Howard showed up every day, tried to interfere in decisions, and gave advice. Sarah understood that it was difficult for him to let go of control over his life's work. But the company was not only his brainchild, but also that of his grandmother Martha, and now it was time to return to her principles. The new store concept began to take shape. The first to change was a small market in a residential area, the very place where the chain's first store had opened, freshly renovated with new equipment and a farm produce section. And most importantly, the people who had worked there for years kept their jobs. "You know," said an elderly cashier who had worked in the store since it opened, "Martha always said that a store should not just be a place to shop, but part of the neighborhood, part of people's lives." Sarah often remembered these words when making decisions. Business is not just numbers on a report. It's people, employees, customers, partners. And when you remember that, the numbers look better too. By the end of the month, it was clear that the changes were working. Sales were up in the renovated store, and customers were leaving positive reviews. Even the most skeptical members of the board of directors began to admit that the new strategy was working. Howard showed up less and less. Perhaps he finally understood that his time was up. The company was entering a new era, and at the helm was a person who remembered not only profits, but also the values instilled by Martha Reed. And her grandmother's ring was no longer in a bank vault, but in a safe in Sarah's office, as a reminder that some things are more important than money and success. The divorce hearing was scheduled for 9 in the morning. Sarah arrived early, not wanting to run into Howard in the court hallway. Her lawyer was already waiting with the documents ready. The division of property turned out to be less complicated than expected. They decided to sell the house. Too many memories. Cars, bills, other property. Everything was divided according to the law. The main issue remained the company, but here Grandma Martha's will put everything in its place. Howard was 15 minutes late. He looked unusually confused in his rumpled suit and with 3 days' stubble. His lawyer was saying something quietly, but Howard didn't seem to be listening. The procedure was quick and formal. Signatures, stamps, documents. 5 years of marriage fit into a few folders of papers. After the hearing, Howard tried to talk to Sarah. "I ruined everything, didn't I?" He stood with his shoulders slumped. "You know, I only just realized what I've done. I chased after something new and lost what was most precious to me." Sarah said nothing. What could she say? Everything had already been said. A week later, Rachel showed up. She came to the office unannounced, confident and elegant as always. "I have a proposal," she began from the doorway. "Several large investors are interested in developing the network, a new format, a modern concept." "No," Sarah didn't even let her finish. "We've already decided on the direction we want to take." "But that's stupid." Rachel sat down in a chair. "Your strategy with local producers and family-owned stores is outdated. Now is the time for aggressive growth and large formats. Time has proven that we are on the right track. Profits are growing, customers are satisfied." "And Howard?" Rachel narrowed her eyes. "Does he agree with this?" "Howard no longer makes decisions in this company." After she left, Sarah stared out the window for a long time. Life was bustling below. People were rushing about their business. A truck was being unloaded with local vegetables at the store entrance, and an elderly customer was chatting with the salesperson about new varieties of cheese. That evening, Howard called. His voice sounded strange. "You know that Rachel tried to sell her connections to another chain of stores? It turns out she was in talks with our competitors even before all this." "I'm not surprised," Sarah replied. "She was always a good player." "And I was an idiot," Howard paused. "You know, I think about Grandma a lot these days. What she would have said about all this. She would have said that some lessons are learned the hard way." The next day, Sarah signed Howard's termination letter. It was a difficult decision, but a necessary one. The company couldn't move forward with him in a leadership role. The board of directors unanimously supported the decision. Grandma Martha's old partners remembered what this business was built on, not greed and ambition, but respect for people and honest work. Howard took the news surprisingly calmly. He collected his things from his office and said goodbye to his employees. He paused at the door. "You know, I really loved you, and I love the company. I just forgot that love isn't just about possession." Sarah said nothing. Again, sometimes silence speaks louder than words. That evening, she sat in her new office for a long time, looking through old photographs. Here was the opening of their first store, with Grandma Martha smiling and holding young Howard's hand. Here was their wedding, with happy faces and plans for the future. Here was the last photo of Martha in her favorite garden. Life doesn't always go according to plan. Sometimes it teaches harsh lessons. But the important thing is to learn the right lessons from them. The next day, Sarah came to the office with new ideas and projects. Life went on, and she knew exactly which direction to take. In 6 months, under Sarah's leadership, the company was truly transformed. The stores were gradually renovated, turning from ordinary grocery stores into cozy family markets. Each one now had a farm fresh produce section, fresh baked goods, and a special atmosphere. That morning, Sarah lingered in her flower shop. She couldn't bring herself to sell it. It was her personal space, where she could think quietly, work with flowers, and take a break from endless meetings and reports. Delivery for Sarah Reed. The familiar voice of the courier brought her out of her reverie. Mike, I think that was his name. He had been delivering flowers from Howard for 3 weeks in a row. Roses again? Sarah didn't even look at the bouquet. No, peonies this time. Looks like someone told the sender that they're your favorite flowers. Sarah looked up. Mike was standing leaning against the doorframe, tall, slightly unshaven, with kind wrinkles around his eyes. "You know," he said, watching Sarah mechanically put the bouquet in a vase, "I delivered flowers for 10 years, and I've never seen a woman look so sad at peonies." "Do you often deliver flowers from ex-husbands?" "Sometimes," he smiled. "Usually roses, red ones, lots of them, as if quantity could replace sincerity." Sarah smiled involuntarily in response. "You're a philosopher, more of an observer. Do you know how many stories you can learn while delivering flowers?" A new batch of documents was waiting for her in the office. The reports showed steady growth. The strategy was working. But Sarah noticed other changes as well. In herself, she no longer woke up at night thinking about betrayal. She didn't flinch when she accidentally saw a car in town that looked like Howard's. She didn't get angry when she received his messages with apologies and requests to meet. New delivery. The secretary peeked into the office. "The courier is waiting downstairs." Mike was standing at the entrance with a small box. "No flowers today. Looks like someone's changed tactics." Inside the box was an old framed photograph of her and Howard on their engagement day, and a note. "Remember this day? I'd give anything to go back there." "You know," Mike was still standing there, "I had a similar case. Only in that case the husband sent his wife candy. Every day, for a month straight." "And how did it end?" "She married a pastry chef," he laughed. "Just kidding. Actually, she just learned to move on." Sarah put the box on the table. "And you? Do you only deliver other people's flowers, or do you ever give your own?" "Sometimes I invite them for coffee." He took out a notebook and wrote down his phone number. "If you ever want to talk about more than just deliveries." That evening, Sarah sat in her office for a long time. The company was growing and developing. She herself was changing, becoming more confident, stronger. She learned to trust her decisions and her instincts. The phone rang, a message from Howard. "I miss you. Let's try again." Sarah looked at the note with Mike's phone number. Sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to let go of the past completely. She dialed the number. Hi. About coffee. Is the offer still on? The phone rang in the reception area. The delivery service was asking where to send the next bouquet from Mr. Reed. Tell them I'm no longer accepting deliveries from that sender, Sarah replied to the secretary. Life went on, and there was room in it not only for work and old memories, but also for new beginnings, new encounters, new feelings. And the photo went into a desk drawer where things that no longer cause pain but are not yet ready to be thrown away are kept. Exactly 1 year had passed since that memorable dinner. Sarah parked her car outside Margaret's house and smiled when she saw that the roses were still blooming profusely in the garden. Some things never change, and that's wonderful. Mike was waiting for her in the car. Are you sure you don't want me to come with you? Next time, Sarah said, lightly touching his hand. Over the past few months, these simple gestures had become so natural. I need to talk to her alone today. Margaret, as always, had set the table in the gazebo. Tea, homemade cookies, the old china. Everything was just as it had been. Only now Sarah saw the world through completely different eyes. You look prettier, Margaret said, looking closely at her guest. And that young man in the car, was he the courier who delivered the flowers from Howard? Sarah laughed. Are you still keeping up with all the news in town? Oh, it's not hard, especially when it comes to a happy woman. They paused, enjoying their tea and the warm spring day. Somewhere in the distance they could hear the noise of the city, but here, in the old garden, time seemed to slow down. You know, Margaret finally said, Martha would have been happy. Not about what happened to Howard, of course, but about how you handled everything. I think about her a lot, about how she saw everything coming. Not everything, Margaret shook her head. She just knew people. She knew that money and power can change a person. And she knew you, your strength, your ability to stay true to yourself. Sarah thought back to the last year. The difficult decisions, the sleepless nights, the gradual revival of the company, and the unexpected support from employees, from old family friends, from Mike. Howard sent a letter last week, she said, taking an envelope out of her bag. He says he's moving to another city, starting over. And you? Are you ready to start over? Sarah glanced at the car where Mike was waiting. With him, everything was different. No rush, no grand plans. Just quiet happiness, mutual respect, and warmth. You know, I understand what Grandma Martha meant when she talked about being true to yourself. It doesn't mean never changing. It means changing while staying true to your principles. Margaret smiled. She would be proud of you. And of the company, too. By the way, how's the new store format going? Great. People appreciate our approach, quality products, attentive service, a family atmosphere. Like in the old days, only on a new level. And your personal life? Margaret looked at Sarah slyly. That young man, does he realize what he's gotten himself into? Mike? Sarah smiled. He's special. You know, he still brings me flowers sometimes. Only now he picks them himself, and he always knows which ones I like. The day was drawing to a close when Sarah finally got ready to leave. Mike was dozing in the car, waiting patiently for her. Take care of him, Margaret said as she left, and take care of yourself. Martha always said that happiness isn't about finding the right person, it's about being the right person. On the way home, Sarah thought about how many lessons life had taught her that year. That betrayal can make you stronger. That loss teaches you to appreciate what you have. That sometimes you have to let go of the past to make room for the future. Mike was humming quietly to himself at the wheel. Being with him was easy and peaceful. No tension, no games. Just two people who found each other when they least expected it. What are you thinking about? He asked, noticing her pensive gaze. About wisdom, about how life puts everything in its place, and about how sometimes the courier with the flowers can be more important than the person who sent them. Mike laughed, and Sarah realized that Grandma Martha was right. The main thing is to stay true to yourself. Everything else will fall into place. It was a hot summer day. Sarah and Mike were sitting in a summer cafe in the city center discussing their upcoming vacation. After 2 years of dating, they had finally decided to take a trip together. How about Italy? Mike showed her something in a travel guide. Small towns, wineries, no rush. Sarah was about to reply, but her attention was drawn to a familiar face at the next table. Howard. He also noticed her and froze for a moment. They hadn't seen each other for over a year since he left town. Sarah had heard that he had started a small business somewhere on the West Coast. He looked different, simpler, calmer, without the usual polish of a successful businessman. Howard stood up and walked over to their table. "Hi, Sarah. Long time no see." "Hello," she said, automatically touching Mike's hand. "Do you remember Mike?" "Of course. The courier who delivered my flowers." Howard smiled sadly. "Looks like I brought you to the right person." Mike calmly held his gaze. Sometimes life works in strange ways. There was a pause. Howard looked from one to the other, as if trying to understand something for himself. "You know," he finally said, "I'm happy for you, Sarah. I really am. You look happy." "Thank you," she smiled. "I heard you're doing well too. Your own business, a new life." "Yes, a small organic food store. Ironically, I finally understood what you meant when you talked about the importance of simple things." He took an envelope out of his pocket. "I was going to send this to you. The documents for my share of the company. I want to give it to you. You know better how to use it." Sarah took the envelope. Their eyes met for a second, and she saw in his eyes not bitterness or regret, but acceptance and a new understanding. "Good luck." Howard nodded to them both and headed for the exit. "Are you okay?" Mike asked quietly when Howard was gone. Sarah looked at the envelope, then at the Italy guidebook, then at the man next to her. Everything fell into place, just as it should have. "You know," she said, "Grandma Martha used to say that every story teaches a lesson. The important thing is to learn the right lesson." "And what lesson did you learn?" Sarah took an old sapphire ring out of her purse. She always carried it with her as a reminder. "That real values don't need copies. They either exist or they don't." Mike took her hand, and they returned to discussing their trip. And somewhere out there, in the summer haze of the city streets, the last shadow of the past dissolved, giving way to a new story. Grandma Martha would have been pleased. After all, she had left Sarah not only her company, but also the most important lesson of all, the ability to remain true to herself no matter what happened.